So now that we have several patients on, and I think you've heard from Lori and from Jen, it's really important that we are having even increased focus on safety. And so what I'm going to do over the next few minutes here is really kind of, lift the hood, if you will, and focus on the steps of the process and really thinking about how safety is not only during the clinical period. It's not just how we actually monitor safety when a patient is on treatment. It actually is a process that we start the moment that a patient application comes into n-Lorem. So there's several elements about safety at n-Lorem. Safety is the highest priority. So we think about meeting each of your families, and you can't help but think, how do I make sure I keep your son safe? How do we keep everyone safe? And we do it by literally focusing on every step of the process. We have a commitment to avoiding any of these unnecessary side effects. And like I said, this spans all the way from patient review all the way through that long-term treatment. It requires a deep understanding of the patient's genotype and phenotype, and it's really about quality at every step. I know you hear us say that a lot, but we continue, especially now that we're seeing these long-term data for patients who have been treated for several years, to come back to that point, because it is increasingly important. And ultimately back to this risk-benefit judgment as well, is very specific to each patient. So there's several elements, thinking about making a high-quality judgment. It's dependent upon several different factors, many different factors. First, that real and true commitment to safety. It's the fact that we've industrialized the process, and really we're embedding the quality control steps throughout the entire process. We're applying the antisense expertise. We're applying what we learned from every ASO to apply it to the next patient's ASO program. We're applying the clinical trial experience. So you've heard from some of our team members. We have several others who are here. I encourage you to chat with them. Everyone is coming to n-Lorem, bringing their experience and making sure that we can translate that to the best and safest experience for your child and your loved one. And finally, we have to maintain the acknowledgement and have the respect for the risk that comes along with what we're doing, right? These are experimental medicines. They're under research INDs. And we know these patients need these drugs, and we must have this healthy respect, if you will, for the risk, and therefore we really embed it at every step. And I come back to this core lens, again, the benefit and the risk. This ratio continues to drive all of our decisions. So really what I'm going to do is go back to walking through our process. Really, I want to share some of the metrics and some of how we're making the decisions throughout the process, giving you some examples specifically on where we've actually potentially discontinued programs because of concerns for patient safety, and really just thinking again and closing about how what we've learned is going to inform some of our future efforts. So again, kind of going through this process, this is just to familiarity from earlier this morning when we talked about data. We really start with this patient review and acceptance decision. And so what we're trying to make the decision there is, can we help this patient? Do we think we can help? So there's several different elements to this decision. It's thinking about what is the ASO strategy? Do we understand the consequence of that pathogenic mutation? Really thinking about what are the clinical risks. If we were to actually address those consequences, what would the clinical risk potentially be? And really understanding what that predicted outcome might be. And so in order to make this decision, our team, we bring together, and you heard about the Access to Treatment Committee, which is a really important element, as well as our internal expertise that really spans from that ASO feasibility through the clinical and medical genetics, the therapeutic area specialists. A lot of this decision is actually, so we get a lot of information about the patient, the genotype and the phenotype, and a lot of this is really actually engagement with the physician. Help us understand more about this patient's journey. Again, each patient is unique. How do we make sure we understand so that we can make the best decision that we think we can for this particular patient at this point in time? So you've heard a little bit about the volume. We actually added last year this sort of pre-submission triage step. So because we acknowledge and recognize that it's really challenging for patients to actually find a physician to submit their application. And so we've added this step where we do have this sort of expert team that meets regularly to review, most of the time, genetic reports. And so the question a parent comes to us and say, do you think you can help? If you think you can, I'm going to go to the ends of the earth to move here, find this physician, do all these things. And so we've really added this, and it's actually been really pretty impactful. And the goal here is to be able to exclude mutations that we know antisense can definitely not target, or to recommend an application. And that may be that we think today, based on what we know, we can help. It may be we can't actually make the decision today, but we need to learn more. And so we suggest you submit an application. And so once we actually have made that recommendation decision, we also have patients who don't go through that pre-submission, but it's an sort of out there if it's needed these days. The physicians submit the application. We have the internal evaluation, again, focused on the genotype and the phenotype. We also are now introducing more detailed assessment of the technical elements specifically for allele selectivity. We have many patients now who require allele selective ASO strategy, and that's a really important point. Do we actually think we can technically design and develop an ASO? We've also started adding in a little bit more rigor, if you will, into clinical site preparedness. So at that point, when a physician submits an application, do we think this particular institution and this physician, are they capable of actually treating this patient? It's very complex, and we'll talk more about that in the coming afternoon and days, but we're really trying to put this together to set ourselves up and set this family up for success as best we can. We have this Access to Treatment Committee. That committee really discusses every single patient's program. That committee makes a recommendation to then lead to the n-Lorem executive decision, after which we then provide this accept or decline decision. So like I said, to date, this is really, we have a team of, I think we're at 32 people now, so our team is becoming quite mighty. But we have reviewed over 500 of these, to date. This is about half of these have submitted the genetic reports. And I think it's interesting to see, even of the ones that we've recommended, so if we recommended application submission for 25%, we have just less than 5% actually that are submitting an application. We think this is still an important step, and I think a lot of this is reflecting the challenges that patients are having finding physicians to be able to help them. And I think really it's important, we do sort of move forward at n-Lorem with the bias to say yes. I mean, that is, you can feel that energy with the way that n-Lorem operates, is we want to help. We really and truly want to help everybody that we think we can. And this is one example for patients who have mutations in this POL R3b gene. We know from the literature that most of these patients are compound heterozygotes, that their mutations are not amenable to ASO therapy. But we've also discovered that there may be a few that could be amenable. And so I think this is one example of when you see the attention to detail and the importance of really each patient being its unique sort of presentation of genotype and phenotype. Even for patients that we know typically would not be amenable, it's important that we actually give them the sufficient evaluation, and we've actually been able to identify patients that we think we might be able to help. So this is really kind of talking a little bit about the application review. We have reviewed, I have two different sets of numbers in this talk because this one we just updated the other day. So we have like 380 applications. We do continue to get many every single month. So we've reviewed 354 of those, over 200 now accepted, and 150 declined. And so that's, really gives you a sense. So we have an increasing percentage of patients that are being accepted. This is really reflecting, again, the increasing knowledge of the community and of the physicians and sort of this pre-submission evaluation that's really, physicians are becoming much more knowledgeable about which mutations might be amenable to antisense treatment. And another example here of really our doing what we possibly can to try to say yes to a patient. And in this case, however, we ultimately had to decline this program. This is a patient who carried heterozygous mutation in this ATP1A3 gene. This mutation caused a very severe childhood neurologic disorder, this alternating hemiplegia of childhood, AHC. We also know that loss of function mutations can lead to a different phenotype, a different pathogenic phenotype, is this rapid onset dystonia Parkinsonism. And so our team actually, I want to say it was several months actually of a lot of research, a lot of engagement. It was really important. We were doing everything we possibly could to make a holistic, comprehensive risk-benefit decision. Did we think we can help this patient? And did we think we could do it safely? And we felt that the risk was too great to pursue an ASO. And so I think this is just another example, trying to again, get you under the hood to understand the depth with which we evaluate every single patient's story, and again, trying to see if we can help as many patients as possible. So now we have a patient with a mutation in a gene. We're moving this forward. We think we can help, and we want to move into ASO discovery and development. And so we're really trying to say, now we have this target, can we actually identify an optimal ASO? So what do we need to do in order to actually be able to answer that question and to really consider safety throughout the process? So we have taken this industrialized design, and screening process for every patient. Like we mentioned on the data discussion, we do design hundreds of ASOs. This is dependent upon what the ASO strategy might be. And then ultimately, by creating this database of all the ASOs that have been designed, you can imagine this enables us to continue to learn. And you add this to the historical decades of expertise, we're able to improve our ability to identify an optimal ASO for every patient. And ultimately, this allows us to eliminate potentially toxic ASOs that have some of these characteristics, and this is based on those millions of ASOs that we've really looked at. And I think it's important, you'll hear more from Nadina and some from Julie later this afternoon, really on our commitment as well to try to advance the technology. And so that's something we continue to learn. There's a really sort of amazing sense of curiosity and interest in the research at n-Lorem. So we really have this discovery path, and that goal is patient to drug. How can we get there as quick as possible? And then we have research, right? So we're really trying to think, okay, what are some of the areas where we know we haven't been able to help patients? What do we need to learn? What are the experiments? What funding do we need to be able to get there? And that's a commitment that our team has, and we continue to actually grow that aspect of n-Lorem. And so you can imagine this requires a whole host of expertise, really a lot of the internal scientists. We have some of the scientists here with us today, so I encourage you tonight to look at the posters. We're really thrilled that each of them is here to be able to meet you individually. But all of these different areas of expertise, each one being just as critical as the next. And ultimately, we do have several extramural partners as well as the Research Management Committee, which was touched on earlier today as well. So we've moved about 15 programs through these RMC meetings. These RMC meetings are really pretty exceptional, actually. So every single RMC meeting, the idea is to bring the totality of the non-clinical data to this committee to say, we have this target and we're ready to move forward. We also, at those committees, will discuss challenges or potential opportunities. So for example, this patient was accepted. The data suggested we needed allele selective ASO at the time. New data's available. Perhaps we can take a non-allele selective approach. That enables us to help more patients with a single ASO. So those are the kind of conversations that happen at this particular committee, and these decisions that are made, again, with the safety of the patient in mind. We're still only halfway through the process at that point. And over 90% of the programs that we've actually taken to GLP talks that have gone through this RMC committee have been successful in identifying an optimal ASO. And that's a really important kind of milestone, because once we move into GLP talks, that's where things get really expensive, right? So ultimately, those become the very resource, heavy steps that are coming next, the GLP talks, manufacturing, and sterile fill as well. So if we look actually at the programs that have been discontinued, of those programs that have been accepted, what we can see here is that almost 10% of programs have actually been discontinued after acceptance due to patient progression. That's a really important statistic. We're learning a lot. You heard from Neil and others, and we continue to recognize the urgency with which we all need to operate. We also know that many patients come to us after many, many years having been diagnosed and looking all around for potential treatments. And so really, earlier diagnosis, earlier movement to treatment, additional funding to be able to get to the drug more quickly. All of those things are so important moving forward. And so we can really conclude, based on this information, we are able to identify an optimal ASO that's safe, it's effective. The FDA guidance documents that were the draft guidance, they were released in 2021. They are sufficient to enable us to be able to identify these optimal ASOs safely and effectively, and they're necessary. They are absolutely necessary. So every step is critical. We actually do several additional steps to really understand the provenance of these ASOs. And we're able to then take the successful ASO programs to learn from those, and also the discontinued programs. And so you'll hear again, coming back to, once we learn something, what are we doing about it? So we've had discontinued programs because they only have a few SNPs, perhaps, to design ASOs against. What are we going to do about that? You'll hear about it later today. So there's a cliffhanger from Nadina. So now we have this beautiful package. Your loved one's ASO is ready to go. We're moving into the IND. How are we actually going to have the best opportunity and the highest probability for success moving through the FDA? There's several different things. It's the alignment with the guidance documents. I think that's inherently to who we are and how we operate on a daily basis. It's meeting and exceeding those non-clinical requirements that I mentioned previously. It's applying everything we learned from each previous IND to be able to be more efficient in the next one. And so questions we get from the FDA, very benign questions that might just need a point of clarification, we can actually address them proactively in the next IND, so they won't have to ask it again. And ultimately, we try to also insert and use some collaboration with the physicians. We're trying to do this a lot more, especially with ASOs that already have an authorized IND. Can we have the physician participate in that clinical overview in the way that the FDA will receive it to be much more efficient and much quicker? And so again, this is, I think this has been a lot of fun, really growing this sort of regulatory expertise at n-Lorem. You try to hire somebody who knows about regulatory and individualized ASOs, they just don't exist, right? I mean, obviously, because it hasn't existed before today. So we're really pleased to be able to have Julie and Lori kind of leading the non-clinical and the clinical from the regulatory perspective. And I think what that means, we've grown our team. The FDA knows us. We engage with them literally on a daily, several times a day basis. And this helps, right? It's going to help for your loved one when their IND comes forward. It's enabling us to really hear from each one sort of within that 30-day window that we do hear from them, and that's their sort of required timeline. So again, this regulatory step, I mean, the FDA, obviously, they're the ultimate arbiter of the data. So we trust and respect and assume that they're going to really evaluate the data and enable us to take these safe and optimal, effective ASOs forward. And for us, we have really come to the realization that this is requiring a very unique combination. It's the experience, it's learning from what we know, it's applying what we know, but it's also thinking creatively and trying to think innovatively. So it's kind of a balance back and forth, and really the combination of that expertise and innovation has been really critical for n-Lorem. So this is just a quick snapshot of, but really focusing more on kind of the IND. You can see how the programs, how we have set up the foundation. We really have, very specific functions, each program moving through very efficiently, effectively as possible. And we do have, at any point in time, 10, 15, 20 INDs that are really being drafted at each period of time. So I think the FDA experience has been really positive. I think the FDA gets a bad rap before all the other stuff going on now, but historically even, the FDA has been extremely collaborative with n-Lorem ever since these guidance documents that were released in 2021, and much before, when Dr. Cook and many others in this space were engaged with the FDA, saying we need these guidance documents, and then they came. That was pretty amazing. And so we have had these INDs approved through 4 different divisions of the FDA, which is really helpful because we know they still have to go to these different therapeutic area divisions, but ultimately there is some consistency across the FDA in the way that our INDs are evaluated. And like I said, we've really expanded our team to try to accommodate. So finally, not going to say too much about the clinical section. You've already heard from Lori a lot on that. Really emphasizing the individualization of the protocol, of the fact that we have this clinical and logistical plan for every patient. And so many of us came from kind of the clinical trial background as well, so we have to think operationally now. So now that we have an ASO, how can we really be efficient? How can we help the sites? We'll talk again a lot more about these sites and physicians, but they're not set up for this inherently. So this is a really challenging logistical, experiment essentially that everyone's doing. And so really having that plan in place is so critical. Lori touched on kind of this mechanistic evaluation that's really important for every adverse event, and also the DSMB. And so this is, you've heard a little bit about this expertise from her, but really the external committees, they just provide so much important expertise and sort of that, checkpoint, if you will, for n-Lorem as well. So the STAR committee that really is helping with these clinical outcome assessments, we've had over 40 of these meetings, drafting 37 protocols so far. I think we talk about the data, and actually had Helen, who's here, I said, how many data points do we actually have, like specifically? It's like, oh, that's a hard question to answer, but ultimately they gave me a very precise answer on 110,000 data points. So that's just, I think it's an important number. Just let's get a sense of what is the scope of the data, and how that we are really coming back to ensuring that that data matters and we can translate that into meaningful outcomes. So from a clinical perspective, we do know, all of the protocols have the safety assessments. They're inherently built into it. Lori kind of already went over all of these elements, but the STAR committee and the DSMB are so critical as well. And REDCap has been a platform that has been actually utilized across the board, and at least as far as we understand from physicians, it's not like the best or the most favorite platform, but it's something that every institution has, so let's use it. And that's really been something that's enabled that clinical data that we've collected. So essentially, what we've summarized here, I think you've heard completely this morning, is that safety is front of mind for all of us. It starts at the point the patient applications come to us. We want to understand the genotype, phenotype. We want to identify the optimal ASO, have the most efficient and data-driven strategy that goes to the FDA, and then really have the clinical operations and the clinical development expertise for every patient. We apply these external committees, and we're so grateful for all of these committee members. They spend it's actually a lot of time that they really spend with us, and really understanding each of your loved ones is really, there's a lot of conversation back and forth so that we can make sure that we have a lot of eyes on all of these decisions that are made for every single patient. And ultimately, safety is our highest priority. It matters to us. Every decision that's small and large, it comes back through this lens for n-Lorem of how do we protect patient safety. And really, hopefully you were able to see from some of these metrics today, this gives you a sense of what the scale is that we're trying to manage. And I think we're doing a pretty good job at it, but over the next coming years, we're going to continue to scale and to continue to grow to be able to help more patients. And ultimately, we're very thrilled to be able to say that we are creating safe and effective ASOs for these nano-rare patients. So with that, I'll finish, and I think we have a Q&A session next.